This is CBC Saturday News.
Good evening, everybody. Finally, some good news today. This footage taken on the 25th by our media team shows Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor touching down on Canadian soil for the first time in 1,020 days after they were arrested on espionage charges in China, which they both denied. Their release happened only hours after the chief financial officer of Huawei, Meng Wanzhou, reached a plea deal with the Americans in which she admitted to some wrongdoing in a fraud case in exchange for her release. Wanzhou has spent the last 3 years out on bail in Vancouver, where she was apprehended, whereas the two Michaels spent their time in a Chinese federal prison. Controversy has sprouted since the beginning of this case, with many believing this is a case of hostage diplomacy. As Trudeau announced the release of the two Canadians from China, he had this to say.
About 12 minutes ago, the aircraft carrying Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor left Chinese airspace, and they're on their way home. They boarded at about 7:30 Ottawa time, along with Dominic Barton, Canada's ambassador to China. These two men have gone through an unbelievably difficult ordeal. For the past 1,000 days, they have shown strength, perseverance, resilience, and grace, and we are all inspired by that. I want to thank their families who've been there for them, supporting them in every way they could, and supporting us in the work we've done to secure their release. I want to thank the countless diplomatic and other Canadian officials who have been tireless over the past 2.5 years to secure the return of these two Canadians. I want to thank our allies and partners around the world and the international community who've stood steadfast in solidarity with Canada and with these two Canadians. And finally, I want to thank Canadians who have kept them in our thoughts and remain determined in the core value that Canadians have of standing up for each other and looking out for each other. These two men have been through an unbelievably difficult situation, but it is inspiring and it is good news for all of us that they are on their way home to their families.
And to that, we bring you over to our political specialist, Bryson Minhinnick. First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for having me. You know, it's an honor to be able to voice my opinion on this show, and I just want to say thank you for giving me the platform. So yeah, the case with Huawei and two Michaels, it's a bizarre one because you don't see it happening often with powerhouse countries. Usually, you know, you might see North Korea or other dictatorship countries try to pull these type of stunts, but you know, you don't really see this with powerhouses, and I think it's good that it happened because it leaves room for discussion. And, you know, we have American news sources like the New York Times deciding to stay neutral on the matter, and I just think that's so stupid, and I disagree with their way of handling it. Not only was this a case of hostage diplomacy, but the fact that it isn't being treated as such or reported as such in the media is almost criminal in itself. You know, Wanzhou flew to Canada, and when USA asked our officials to detain her, and we did, 9 days later, we have two Canadians being charged with espionage on no grounds. I mean, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous in itself. But the real kicker is after she boarded her plane, both Spavor and Kovrig were green-lighted to go home. You know, it's almost comical watching people call this a coincidence. And I think action should be taken on both China and the U.S., and here's why. First of all, China can't just kidnap innocent people because they're upset with a country. And I want to commend Canada for staying firm with China and, you know, holding on to Wanzhou. But because of this, you know, two families suffered greatly. They were without their fathers and their husbands for, 3 years. And I think China needs to face some sort of punishment. I think, an economical punishment might be most appropriate here, possibly higher tariffs. I've seen a couple people throw out there, and I agree. I think that's one way of, showing we mean business without straining relationships too much. But this not only shows China that we aren't a country you can bully into submission, but it also shows the world that we mean business, and attacks against our country and its people won't be tolerated. As for the US, we have to stand up to them and stop being their little lapdog. Because of this affair between China and the US, we suffered the most, and China and US are going to go unscathed? That's ridiculous. Trudeau needs to learn how to say no sometimes. In his speech, where he addresses that both Michaels are coming home, he talks about how difficult the ordeal was, but this is an ordeal that he created himself by giving in to the US's pressure and arresting Wanzhou on our territory. And then he has the nerve to thank people who made his return possible. The only people who made his return possible was the US dropping charges on Wanzhou and China not caring enough to keep their hostages. Enough is enough. We're our own separate country, and we need to stand up straight instead of lurking behind the US's shadows and submitting to their every will.
Thank you so much for your feedback, Bryson. I'm sure Canadians appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Thanks for having me. Anytime.
This is CNN Breaking News.